All right, everybody. I should be live. And if I am, please let me know. Because we need to talk about this global war scenario and how it's escalating towards something much worse very quickly. And there's a lot happening in many different arenas between many different countries. And that's concerning. And of course, there's a lot to talk about here on the home front as well, which we will soon, of course, on the channel. I like to kind of get back around to different topics whenever I can that are relevant to preparedness. But tonight we need to focus on what's happening globally because it does have an existential risk for those of us here in the United States. And as I am still logging into the system here, I want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can get out here, do live streams like this one, provide you with free information as best that I can, and of course, check out gear and equipment that can be beneficial to anyone who wants to be prepared. So a big thanks to Midway USA. 5x5s are coming in as we speak. So I have Old Man Bones with the 5x5, Loretta Hutch as well. Jeffrey Starnes, North Carolina here. Good to have you as well. Jason D, 5x5. And Kevin Purdy also says 5x5. I think we are alive. So a lot to discuss. And of course, I do want to mention, let everyone here know that tomorrow night, Tuesday, October 22nd at 7 p.m. Central Time, I'll actually be live streaming with Bear Independent to discuss things that are happening on the ground in Eastern Tennessee as well as Western North Carolina, and to discuss some things relevant to personal preparedness regarding disaster deployment relief, right? Because a lot of us might not have the skills or the equipment or the resources necessary to actually deploy and help others, and I'm going to ask them a lot of questions about that so that we can try to plan accordingly in order to be an asset for our communities as a whole as well as our entire country. So please look forward to that. I will be posting that live stream tomorrow. You should get a notification if you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed, please do. It would help the channel, but it would also help you get some good information. So let's get started tonight. Things are going to be very interesting, okay? And I would like to get going with the Middle East, because it is clear that we are on our way to a war in the Middle East. And here's the thing. Myself, as well as many others, have predicted that this war would likely start before the election. The election is in 2 weeks and 1 day. So this is getting very close, and they are out of time, which is why I use that language in the thumbnail tonight. Those who want this war to happen aren't sure if they're going to be able to make it happen within the next 5 or 6 months, so they're going to try to do what they can right now, right? So this is a very desperate and concerning time for those of us who are worried about the U.S. entering yet again another Middle East war that we don't necessarily need to be involved in. And there are some things I want you to have to think about here that we need to discuss. So, widening the war. The U.S. sends troops to Israel. This is from October 20th, 2024. If you're new here, we do stories from the previous week to go over everything that's happened, and we may reach out into history and try to get some context about things that are happening now to also remind us about things that have happened in the past. And if you're, of course, on replay crew, you're the best. Please check in the comments because I appreciate you all, okay? The danger should be plastered on every wall in every office occupied by a military and political advisor. Israel's attempt to reshape the Middle East, far from giving it enduring security, will merely serve to make it more vulnerable and unstable than ever. In the mix and mess, it will be its greatest sponsor and guardian, the United States, a giant of almost blind antiquity in all matters concerning the Jewish state. In a measure that should have garnered bold headlines, the Biden administration has announced the deployment of some 100 U.S. soldiers to Israel, who will be responsible for operating the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or the THAAD system. They are being sent to a conflict that resembles a train traveling at high speed with no risk of stopping. As Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant promised in the aftermath of Iran's October 1st missile assault on his country, our strike will be powerful, precise, and above all, surprising. It would be of such a nature that they will not understand what happened and how it happened. There's a lot of evidence that we are going to be involved with Israel in a Middle East war between Israel and Iran at any moment at this point in time. And we have to be prepared for that because we know what these wars lead to in the sense of just overall stress on the system, but also an unending meat grinder for those that we care about. In October 16th meeting between the Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III and Gallant, the deployment of a mobile THAAD battery was seen as an operational example of the United States' ironclad support to the defense of Israel. Largely meaningless bits of advice were offered to Gallant, that Israel would continue taking steps to address the dire humanitarian situation and take all necessary measures to ensure the safety and security of UN peacekeepers operating in Lebanon's south. We know that they are on a war front rampage. Israel has no chains attached, right? They are doing whatever they feel they want to do. There's no longer any concern about international outcry or humanitarian crises or anything along those lines. So these people are going full-fledged ahead with a full-blown fire campaign. I don't know what else to call it. The charade continued the next day in a conversation between Austin and Gallant discussing the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. THAAD was again mentioned as essential for Israel's right to defense itself, while representing the United States' unwavering, enduring, and ironclad commitment to Israel's security. So the THAAD system is maybe not the biggest deal in the sense of overall power that's being imported into Israel as of this time, but the fact that it's in conjunction with 100 U.S. troops who are there to train other troops how to use it, as well as to be part of the intelligence gathering services that are necessary for the equipment to be as efficient as possible. This is all happening, and the U.S. is directly involved. That's why this is a big deal, okay? Now, we also have to remember that the Pentagon and everyone else within the war hawk section of the Republican Party was 100% on board with this. And we also, obviously, there's war hawks in both parties, but you know who I'm talking about. A statement from the Pentagon Press Secretary, Major General Patrick Ryder, was a fatuous effort in minimizing the dangers of the deployment. The battery would merely augment Israel's integrated air defense system, affirm the ongoing commitment to Israel's defense, and defend Americans in Israel from any further ballistic missile attacks from Iran. Okay? Now, here's the thing. People don't want to be involved in another war in the Middle East. I don't want to. I'm sure you don't want to either. Americans are struggling. Relief efforts are barely even started when it comes to everything that's happening in the southern part of our country right now, especially in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, all the states who have recently been affected by these storms. But we can't afford another major war, especially one that isn't necessarily involving us at this moment. But unfortunately, this is where we're heading. And you can tell because we are putting troops in harm's way in order to create a segue for us to enter this war. The very public presence of U.S. troops working alongside their Israeli counterparts in anticipation of broadening conflict does not merely suggest Washington's failure to contain their ally. It entails a promise of ceaseless supply, bolstering, and emboldening. Furthermore, it will involve placing U.S. troops in harm's way, a quixotic invitation if there ever was one. As things stand, the U.S. is already imperiling its troops by deploying them in a series of bases in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. Iran's armed affiliates have been making their presence felt, harrying the stationed troops with increasing regularity since the Israel-Hamas war broke out on October 7th last year. A gradual, attritive toll is registering, featuring such attacks as those on Tower 22 base in northern Jordan in January that left 3 U.S. soldiers dead. Okay? That is the problem here. Our people are being put in that area to create a response, okay? Writing in August for The Guardian, former U.S. Army Major Harrison Mann eventually realized an awful truth about the mounting assaults on these sandy outposts of the U.S. Imperium. There was no real plan to protect U.S. troops beyond leaving them in their small, isolated bases, while local militants, emboldened and agitated by U.S. support for Israel's brutal war in Gaza, used them for target practice. To send more aircraft and warships to the Middle East also served to encourage reckless escalation towards a wider war, providing insurance to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I guess that's how I say that now, that he could be protected from the consequences of his actions. Okay? Now here is where they get us into this mess and they garner public support and try to boost American morale for these wars in the process. Daniel Davis, a military expert at defense priorities, is firmly logical on the point of enlisting U.S. personnel in the Israeli cause. Naturally, if Americans are killed in the execution of their duties, there will be howls from the pro-war hawks in the West, demanding the president protect our troops by firing back on Iran. It was exactly the sort of thing that gets nations sucked into war they have no interest in fighting. This is where a lot of the danger lies. We're deploying troops into a hot war zone with the understanding that they could easily be taken out by an enemy attack, and that enemy is most likely going to be Iran, if not one of their proxies, okay? So, real quick, I want to jump back here in the chat. Rip Curl Readiness, USMC Devil Dog 0311, Kevin Ramsey. Some great mods in the house tonight. I appreciate you all being here, and thank you so much for hanging out and making it happen. And we also know that MB says, howdy, chat is nice. Tube has shadow banned all of my comments on videos. Well, I will say, MB, it is definitely becoming more strict with what it auto flags. And I hope everyone understands that on my videos, I don't go through and start removing things unless they're clearly a spam account. But otherwise, I don't have time to vet every single comment that comes through. I hope people get that. I'm a one-man team, right? So here's the thing. I don't remove your comments. Things get automatically flagged and taken away before I even get to see them. So please don't accuse me of being out there censoring every single thing that I disagree with or whatever it may be. Anyhow, okay, let's go ahead and talk about how we have other reasons to believe that we're preparing for this war with Iran as of right now. Okay, this is from Open Democracy. I get sources from all over the internet, and these are opinion pieces that I think are well researched and have some good points to them, which is why I share them. I don't agree with every outlet or whatever it is in the sense of their agenda or their ideology whenever I go in and start doing my research. But I find things that are pertinent or relevant, and I share them, because that's what matters to me, not who's who or what's what. Okay, if that makes any sense. Unless it's clearly, obviously, disseminated to us in the sense of trying to elicit a certain reaction, right? There's now no doubt that the U.S. is preparing for war with Iran. This week, the U.S. quietly deployed more weapons to Israel, particularly those that will be effective against Iran. U.S. and Israeli leaders have celebrated this week's death of Hamas military commander Yahya Sinwar. I just can't get that name tonight. But while attention is focused on what it means for Gaza and the unlikely possibility of a ceasefire, few have noticed what this means for the much wider U.S.-Iran war. The U.S. has, of course, put its military might, money, and rhetoric behind Israel in its devastating operations in Gaza since last October. More specifically, the U.S. has a little-noticed permanent military presence in Israel itself, an advanced long-range, over-the-horizon X-band radar system in Negev. It is believed to be particularly effective against Iranian medium-ranged ballistic missiles. But this week, two recent developments point to U.S. preparing for direct confrontation with Iran as it sharpens its ammunition and shares even more weaponry with its ally Israel. Now, here's an interesting one. First, we saw the U.S. use long-range B-2 stealth bombers in attacks on underground weapons stores in Yemen for the first time. Only the U.S. has these weapons, which are thought to be the world's most powerful bunker busters and can reach 200 feet underground. If there is a war with Iran, it will be one of very few means of inflicting damage on some of Iran's most heavily protected targets, because a lot of their heavily protected targets are quite underground. That might sound scaremongering, but the bombing of the Houthi targets in Yemen with these tools looks uncomfortably like a dry run for any conflict with Iran. Secondly, we saw the deployment of an advanced U.S. anti-missile system to Israel. Once again, they're talking about the THAAD system, okay? Now, from an IDF perspective, if Netanyahu agrees to a substantial military attack on Iran, the likely response from Iran will be to do its best to swamp Israeli missile defenses. Thus, the U.S. THAAD deployment will reduce the risk of an effective Iranian response. This all seems a far cry from the repeated U.S. calls for a ceasefire, but these are best seen as part of a smokescreen behind which lies a long-term enemy. Most Europeans, including the British, tend to forget that ever since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, it has been Iran that is seen in Washington as by far the worst threat to U.S. political and economic interests in the Middle East. Okay? This fits in substantially with the Israeli position where Iran is, in the longer term, as by far the greatest threat to its security, far worse than Hamas, Hezbollah, or any other political movement. Moreover, an Iran equipped with nuclear weapons would really be seen as an existential threat. That existential threat may not fully extend to the U.S. view, but Iran is, by some measure, the greatest challenge to U.S. Middle East policy. Okay? So, These are the levels of evidence that are coming out right now that we're well on our way to expanding this war in the Middle East. And tonight we are going to talk about the Middle East, including Iran, Israel, obviously Lebanon and things of that nature. But we're also going to move over to Russia and Ukraine, and of course NATO being the majority of Europe. And we're going to talk about North Korea and South Korea and China and Taiwan, which are a lot of countries that are all involved in open conflict at this point in time, which would make you wonder whether or not this global war is what many might call a world war. So, let's see here. Patrick Neal, don't you reply. I'm just letting you know, don't do it, okay? Now, we also have a recent war plan leak from Israel and the U.S. about how they're going to attack Iran. So, we're going to talk about this for a second just to give you some context in case you were unaware of this. But then we're going to talk about, or at least speculate, as to why this was leaked. I have my reasons and my ideas, but I want to hear yours as well once we get to that point. Will Netanyahu incite a war with Iran? Leaked U.S. docs detail Israel's attack plans. Okay. The Biden administration has launched a probe after highly classified U.S. intelligence documents were posted online, showing that Israel is taking steps to launch a retaliatory attack against Iran. Meanwhile, a drone hit Benjamin Netanyahu's seaside home Saturday, in what the Israeli prime minister has called an assassination attempt by Iran's proxy Hezbollah. And we will talk about that a little bit more as well. Somewhat convenient, certainly plausible, but will definitely be used as leverage moving forward. Okay? As tensions between Iran and Israel heat up, we go to Tehran to speak with Hassan Ahmadian, a professor at the University of Tehran, who says Netanyahu and Israel have continually instigated violence in the region while trying to tell the world that it is Iran that is the problem. Now, here's the thing. I want to make sure to clarify this before we move into this, okay? First off, I don't have to agree or support every little thing Israel does, right? I'm worried about America. And when it comes to Iran, sure, they can say what they want, but I know they're full of it as well. So this is just to build context as to how close we are to this war. It's not to talk about either side as being virtuous in any certain way. I feel that we have people on the ground, the innocent civilian who's paying the price for all of this, while these people in elite positions are just deciding our fates without any input from the regular person. So that's what we're dealing with now, and that is unfortunately modern warfare. All right. This is actually an interview, and this is a transcript of the interview, but I think it's important to look at. The Biden administration has launched a probe after highly classified U.S. intelligence documents were posted online showing Israel is taking steps to launch a retaliatory attack on Iran. One document came from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the other from the NSA, the National Security Agency. The documents reference recent Israeli drills involving air-launched ballistic missiles, as well as covert drone activity. On Friday, President Biden was asked if he knew how and when Israel would attack Iran. Biden responded by saying yes and yes, unquote. Now understand that they're talking about using ballistic missiles in Iran. Air-launched, of course, but still, this is a significant escalation compared to what we've seen in the past. Iran has issued a complaint with the UN's nuclear watchdog over Israeli threats to strike Iran's atomic energy sites in retaliation for a series of Iranian missiles that were fired into Israel earlier this month. Iran's foreign ministry issued a statement today saying, quote, threats to attack nuclear sites are against UN resolutions and are condemned, unquote. Who cares about UN resolutions? Certainly I do not. I don't think anyone else does either. I think this is a facade of rules and regulations about war that most of the world doesn't pay attention to, especially those who aren't necessarily of the Western influence. So to assume these things would matter is naive in my opinion. But anyway, this comes as a drone hit Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's seaside home Saturday in the northern Israeli town of Qasera. Netanyahu and his family were not home at the time of the incident, which caused superficial damage to his home. Okay, that's going to be something we're going to talk about later. Okay. Let's see, we're talking to the prime minister, all this stuff. We're not worried about that. Then they talk to the guy in Iran, all this stuff. Now we're going to talk about what this guy's actually going to say, okay? So, Professor, can you comment on these leaked U.S. documents, intelligence documents, describing satellite images of Israeli military preparations for a potential strike in Iran? You also had the foreign ministry coming out today in Tehran speaking out and saying it would be illegal to attack nuclear plants in Iran, according to the United Nations. If you can comment on all of this. The intelligence documents, not clear how they were leaked. coming from, among other places, the NSA, the National Security Agency, the intelligence agency in the United States that's many times larger than the CIA. You know we still don't know the intricacies of these attacks, says Hassan Ahmadian. But obviously, if they're intentional or not intentional, the leaking, it makes it different. I mean, the messaging or the message of them being leaked will be different. But in any case, I think the Iranians are saying that these leaks show that the Israelis are trying to attack places of strategic importance that are legally, should not be attacked. But Israel is obviously trying to, or inching closer to attacking them. It's within the Iranian, international and diplomatic reach, which the foreign minister and the president have been on the past few weeks, telling the world that we don't want escalation, but obviously the Israelis are coming to force it upon us, and we'll have to retaliate. Keep in mind, this is coming from a country who has launched hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel. So you don't want escalation, but you just figured you could launch hundreds and hundreds of missiles at Israel without any consequence. I mean, that's just not how things work, no matter what the justification for doing it was in the first place. But here we are. So here's why I wanted to bring this up. Because these leaks are problematic in the sense of them being leaked and these plans of a retaliation strike actually being given out to the public. But you have to wonder why these leaks were happening in the first place. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is the fact that either somebody within the system is actually trying to avoid some sort of larger scale conflict in the Middle East. Because I personally would not like to see that happen. I know that this could escalate to a nuclear level very quickly, and I don't think that it's going to benefit us here in the United States by any means at all. Unless you want to take the Lindsey Graham route of going in there in order to loot all the resources humanly possible. But what I'm trying to say is that these leaks might have been done by somebody within either Israel or the United States when it comes to their defense departments, trying to prevent a larger scale war from happening. And the people who are in charge right now, the ones who are in the White House, right, are wanting a war to happen. They want this to happen, and it's been telegraphed for quite some time that they wanted this to happen before the election, which is, like I said, why they're out of time. And this might have been their way of trying to get it up to that point, while simultaneously stationing 100 United States troops in Israel in harm's way operating military equipment. So my thought process here, and this is me being optimistic because I'm not a very optimistic person when it comes to these conflicts that are happening right now, but being optimistic about it, my hopes are that somebody inside understands what's actually at stake here, understands what is in the best interest of the United States and its people, or maybe even Israel and its people for all I know. But regardless, somebody might have made the right decision here to try to prevent that from happening. And if they were able to prevent that retaliatory strike from pulling off what it wanted to pull off and having to change things and delay these actions to a certain degree, it may not have the effect that those who are in power right now wanted to see occur previous to the election. And that's exactly what my thought process is. Now, of course, there could be a more sinister reason for these leaks, and that could obviously be Iran hacked into a system and was able to leak this in order to give themselves some additional cover or some additional room in the sense of time to be able to prepare for these attacks, or it was possibly leaked as a way to confuse them and give them bad information so that they made preparations, and then obviously the attack comes in a completely different form or from a completely different vector. Whatever it is, obviously it was leaked for a purpose, right? But I think these people, these crazy people here in our government, as well as in the government of Israel and all these other countries, want this war to happen so badly. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody said, not today. And I really honestly hope that's what happened, because it might give us a little bit of hope that people are in these different branches trying their best to avoid things from actually reaching the level that this would push them to. Because this is a multifaceted war. This is not just Israel and Iran. This is many other foreign countries being involved in this situation right now. Israel is right now bombing Lebanon, right? Lebanon is not Iran, right? And yes, is Hezbollah there? Sure. But this is a sovereign country that they are currently in bombing buildings. So you have to understand that they want these things to occur. Now, Gunslinger's still subscribed. I like it. Who's unsubscribed? I don't know who these people are. Gypsy Soul. Why? So why does everyone get so emotionally invested in these things? We have to call it like it is when it comes to these world events. You can't be so tribalistic about these little things and then not be willing to understand the nuance or look at the other perspectives of it and actually develop a well-informed opinion about what's happening. You have to, like, I have personal opinions, of course. I don't share them at every single turn because those opinions can change or develop over time based on new information. But if you're going to throw a tantrum because somebody disagrees with your point of view, you're the problem that we have in the country at this point in time, where people can't have a conversation or at least listen to a different point of view or perspective and actually digest it for what it has inside of it in the sense of information, rather than immediately divesting from the conversation because it's not fitting your point of view or your agenda, right? And I am still trying to recover from the sickness, so I appreciate you all still being here. Now, I try my best to provide information in such a way that it doesn't create so much tension, but we're at a point in time right now where the tension is starting to matter less to me and the information getting into the right hands is more important. So with that in mind, let's talk about this Netanyahu assassination attempt, okay? Israel will respond to attempted assassination of Netanyahu, diplomatic source says. Now you have to question this whole assassination attempt. Why will they respond to this? Well, according to them, it's coming from Hezbollah, but it's also from Iran because Iran controls Hezbollah, which most of us can agree with. They're financed by Iran. They're supplied weaponry by Iran. They are part of Iran when it comes to their proxies and how they operate in the Middle East. However, this shows that they're willing to use any bit of leverage possible to keep this war moving forward. And this war is no longer just in Gaza, right? Like, this is all over the place at this point in time. We're seeing things happen in Yemen. We're seeing things happen in Lebanon. We're seeing things happen now in Iran that have happened already. Stuff is all over the place in the Middle East right now. And that's not good for the stability of the world, especially when we're on the brink of a World War III scenario, which I personally believe we're already in. But in order for it to be publicly accepted, that's what I'm talking about when I say we're on the brink. So, a drone from Lebanon was launched toward Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home in Sisera on Saturday, his spokesman said, adding that the premier was not in the vicinity and there were no casualties. No warning sirens sounded in the northern city ahead of the drone impact and explosion. Now, that's a concerning statement in my opinion, because based on their ability to intercept missiles and drones and using the Iron Dome system, it's just surprising that, I know this is further out in Sisera. It's not necessarily in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, but at the same time, they're very good about intercepting incoming attacks or at least warning their people about them. So this gives me a little bit of a pause to say, okay, well, how? Right? But okay, we'll just keep moving forward. A diplomatic source told the Jerusalem Post on Saturday night that Israel plans to retaliate for the attempted assassination of Netanyahu by Hezbollah, explaining that ultimately Iran is responsible. And there it is. It's by Hezbollah, but guess what? Iran's the real bad guy, which I agree with, but I'm just trying to demonstrate the fact that they're using every single piece of any evidence they can to move forward with this war with Iran. The source spoke after a Hezbollah-launched drone hit a building in Sisera. Israel has claimed that it was fired at Netanyahu's home in that city, but that neither the prime minister nor his family were home at the time. It has not been confirmed whether the drone, I guess the website wanted to reload apparently, actually hit his home. Just so you know, apparently saying Netanyahu while you have a sinus infection is very difficult. So bear with me, all right? Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, so Iran is also responsible for this incident, the source stated. There will be a response to the attempted assassination. Israel is already poised to retaliate against the Islamic Republic for its ballistic missile attack on the Jewish state at the start of October. I say to Iranians and their partners in the axis of evil, anyone who harms the citizens of the state of Israel will pay a heavy price for it, Netanyahu said on Saturday night. The Iranian agents, not Hezbollah, right? Like, we understand it's Iran. The Iranian agents who tried to assassinate me and my wife today made a bitter mistake, he said. This will not deter me or the state of Israel from continuing the war of revival against our enemies to ensure our security for generations. How will they secure their security for generations? By literally getting rid of anyone who threatens them in the entire vicinity, which is Iran. So, this stuff is happening, and it is problematic. Now, there are some other interesting things here I want to point out as well. Real quick, got some good people out here. Let's see. Joe Carr, Ash once said, good, bad, I'm the one with the gun. Always good to be the good guy with the gun. Joe Carr, I agree. You know what? Ash is a pretty solid main character. So, because if you're going to shop S-Mart, right? Now, here's something I just want to do a quick update on in the sense of what Israel is dealing with in Lebanon right now. This is just a quick update. There have been at least 13 strikes from Israeli drones, and the Air Force targeted 3 locations, Ozai, Jinnah, and Heret Harek in southern Beirut. Lebanon's health ministry says the attacks have killed at least 4 people, including a child. The director of field hospitals at Gaza's health ministry says Israel is targeting the 3 remaining medical facilities in northern Gaza. The Israeli army spokesperson claims that a strike in Syria's capital killed the commander of a Hezbollah unit who is responsible for the transfer of weapons from Iran. Israeli authorities have arrested 7 citizens who say they were paid by Iran to collect intelligence for more than 2 years. An Israeli air raid on the eastern city of Baalbek has hit a building in a densely packed residential area, killing 6 people, including a child. UNRWA, which I believe is United Nations Relief and Work Aid, I believe, says Israel continues to prevent humanitarian missions from reaching areas of northern Gaza with critical supplies, including water, food, and medicine for people under siege. Now, here's the thing. This is when having that nuance available to you in the sense of having an open mind and a genuinely acceptable perspective on things is important, because you can look at this and say, I can't believe Israel is stopping this humanitarian mission from reaching northern Gaza, right? But you also have to remember that the UNRWA, or like I said, United Nations Relief Work Aid or something along those lines, these people were found to have helped Hamas in the October 7th attack. So it wouldn't necessarily be a trusted source of information, especially in the sense of bias, but also you could understand why Israel doesn't care what they say. So these are things you have to keep in mind when going through this information. It's not just reading it at face value and just saying, well, okay then, right? Which is what I try to do here. I'm doing my best to try to provide you with good information, but also context and some level of perspective that isn't just my personal bias, because I certainly have it. Now, MB, I'm glad I've been a prepper for decades. You know what? I'm glad you have been too. We need more people like you so that there's less people to worry about, right? That's part of the best thing. So, let's see here. I want to also go over here and say there's 2 kinds of people in this world, those with loaded guns and those who dig. You dig, says Roger Wood. Yep, there's a lot of that going in the chat tonight. All right. Little Scioliism. I always mess up your name. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Sciolism? I guess that makes more sense. And then we have Luis Talavera. How many Iranian sleeper cells are in the USA? The FBI must answer that excellent question. Well, the FBI would have to know the answer to that question to be on top of that. Now, they have obviously intercepted some of these cells. And as I spoke about in my recent video, yes, we had that man who was an Afghanistan citizen, who came here and then plotted through ISIS to create some sort of election day attack. Now, I have zero doubt that there are others like him. And I want to remind everybody in this moment that you need to have your head on a swivel and you have to have full situational awareness on November 5th, especially if you're going to polling stations or anywhere that's crowded. It's a very important thing for you to remember because these people are out there and they've already been given directives, as we've been told, based on that person's testimony in court. So let's go ahead and talk about another part of the world where things are getting weird. Ukraine and Russia. It sounds like old news, doesn't it, at this point in time? But it just keeps going. And the reason it keeps going is because it keeps escalating, not because it's improving. It hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse. And now the rhetoric is getting even crazier. All right? Now, there is some nuance to this we'll talk about here right afterward, but because there's been some clarifications issued by Zelensky, but this is what was said before those clarifications, which will tell you what they're really considering. And we're also going to talk about how this isn't necessarily as obvious as it might sound in the sense of them needing to acquire these weapons. This is more of a telegraph, in my opinion. Ukraine will seek nuclear weapons if it cannot join NATO. Membership vital to victory plan. Vladimir Zelensky tells EU summit as he warns of need for powerful deterrent against Russia. Vladimir Zelensky appeared to suggest Ukraine could seek nuclear weapons unless it is given NATO membership. The Ukrainian president told European Union leaders during a speech in Brussels that Kiev needed a strong deterrent against Russia. Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, which will serve as protection, or it must be part of some kind of alliance. Apart from NATO, we do not know of such an effective alliance, Mr. Zelensky said. He added that Donald Trump agreed that it was a fair argument for Ukraine to seek atomic weaponry when the two leaders spoke in the United States. And here's the thing. I think it's a fair argument for any country to seek atomic weaponry because every other country that has it has a bargaining chip over them that they can't do anything about. So I understand a country wanting atomic weapons, and I understand they're feeling the need to invest in them. But regardless, probably less nukes the better in all honesty, but here we are. That's just never going to happen, right? Ukraine inherited the world's third biggest nuclear arsenal, estimated at several thousand nuclear warheads when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, but in a gesture of goodwill, surrendered them 3 years later. Okay, although Russia has threatened to fire a nuclear missile at Ukraine, this is the first time that Mr. Zelensky has discussed building similar capabilities. Here's the thing. They had thousands of nuclear warheads back during the Soviet Union, and they probably still have some. Let's be honest. Do you know how many of those Russian nuclear suitcase bombs just disappeared off the map? Do you know how many missing nuclear warheads there are in the world? The number is very high. So these people have access to a nuclear weapon one way or the other. They can get it in the black market, thanks to all the billions of dollars of funding that they've gotten from us. They can also just have one already because it was already there. Let's be honest. Trying to assume that everyone can keep track of every single nuclear device just because it was said to be done by the United Nuclear Agency is not necessarily a reasonable thought process, is it? So these people have a nuclear weapon. You have to assume that. It's stupid to assume otherwise. But they're also letting us know they can build one right away. We have the material, we have the knowledge. If the order is given, we will only need a few weeks to have the first bomb, he said. The West should think less about Russia's red lines and more about our red lines. And that is obviously thanks to the fact that they already have this stuff. So to me, this is a telegraphing statement. This is them saying that if they don't get a NATO membership, which by the way, they aren't qualified to do so while in an open conflict, so I don't know how that's supposed to work for them, that they'd be willing to use a nuclear device, and that only takes them a few weeks, aka give them a few weeks of not being entered into NATO, and they might already have that device surprisingly ready to go. This is where we're headed. They could have already used one by now. That's my opinion. There's really no reason to think otherwise. However, they're doing things in such a way that it's going to have to involve NATO, because without NATO, they will not win that war, no matter what. And at this point in time, to me, it seems like the regime in Ukraine, which it plenty sure is a regime based on the fact that they've suspended elections for so long at this point, they don't even care about winning per se. Now, the goal is revenge, and the goal is to hurt Russia as much as possible in the process, right? So, and that's what we've seen with the Kursk invasion, which has generally declined quite a bit ever since. But now we're going to see even worse things if something goes nuclear. Now, Russia obviously has some thoughts on this whole situation as well, which just shows you how close we're getting to these events actually occurring. Like, this is a scary scenario. Putin calls Zelensky's comments on nuclear arms for Ukraine dangerous provocation. The Ukrainian leader has clarified that what he wants is NATO membership, which is better than any kind of weapon. Well, of course it is, because we have all the weapons. And if they got into NATO, we'd already have an Article 5 situation on our hands. So, yes, of course they want that. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday condemned comments by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky suggesting that Kiev would seek nuclear weapons if it could not join NATO as a dangerous provocation. The Ukrainian leader made the comments at an EU summit on Thursday, in which he said either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, which will protect us, or we must have some kind of alliance. This is a dangerous provocation, Putin said at a meeting with journalists from the BRICS group of emerging economies, warning any step in this direction will be met with corresponding reaction. What does that mean? A corresponding reaction regarding anything nuclear doesn't sound very good to me. It is not difficult to create nuclear weapons in the modern world, Putin added. And he's right, especially in Ukraine, where they already have the know-how and the capabilities and the material. I do not know whether Ukraine is capable of doing it now. It is not so easy for Ukraine of today, but in general, there is no great difficulty here. Okay? And then, like I said, Zelensky tried to clarify his words to be understood very correctly. He did not intend to create any threat to the world nor any nuclear weapons, he told a group of journalists. We all know it's obviously not the case. But there's a lot of nuclear rhetoric happening between those two countries right now. And the threat isn't just against Russia. The threat is also blackmail for NATO to say, hey, if you guys don't do what we want, aka sending us all the aid and all the weapons and all the troops that we ask for, then we might just launch a nuke. And then what are you going to do? When Russia starts launching nukes, what's your plan then? And I think that we all know that at some point NATO would get involved. It's just the way it would work, and they're just willing to get us involved regardless of how we feel about it. Trust me, a lot of people in NATO want to be involved to that degree as well. They don't have to be publicly right now because, well, they're already doing it. So, John Carchia, divide and conquer. 100%. Always the case. That's how they roll. Let's see here. Oh, and some people also wanted to bring up the fact that, well, what would one nuclear weapon do for Ukraine, right? And honestly, probably nothing. Like, what could they actually do with it? But that's the thing. It's not about what it could do. It's about what reaction it could create and how that could entangle other countries and allies into a war that they need aid in, right? So, cult leader, so tired of waiting. I understand. It's actually exhausting to continually have to analyze and look at this information and see where we are in the sense of how many minutes to midnight, right? But at the same time, it's part of the job of being prepared, right? By having this information and trying our best to understand what's going on in the world around us, it gives us a better way to plan and strategize for the future and understanding what we need to focus on based on what threat level is rising to the occasion in the moment. So keep that in mind. Good evening to you, Dave Sickles. Good to see you. Now, we also have evidence that North Korea is in Ukraine fighting, right? Or at least in Russia. This is where world wars start to begin, okay? Sorry about all the ads, but if you use certain ad blocking extensions on this platform, things go poorly, just to let you know. Chinese mercenary fighting for Russia says North Koreans killed in Ukraine. This is from October 21st. Like this is happening right now, okay? A Chinese mercenary has shared details about North Korean soldiers allegedly killed shortly after they joined Russia's war effort in Ukraine. The information was shared on X by the account at YU2Zeli, I guess we'll just say that's what it is, on Sunday, in a conversation between a gun for hire fighting alongside Russian forces who goes by the handle Dian Yuzhang and a mercenary who has returned to China and goes by the name Li Dafu. These claims emerged just days after South Korea's National Intelligence Service confirmed that North Korean troops had been training in Russia before being sent to bolster Russia's diminished forces and help contain Ukraine's counteroffensive in Russia's Kursk region. During the broadcast, Dian Yuzhang told host Li Dafu that North Korean soldiers had already experienced losses. After just one day, 8 people have died, senior officers, Yuzhang said, laughing as the two discussed recent events on the front lines. According to South Korean intelligence, as many as 12,000 North Korean troops would be sent over, with Ukrainian intelligence saying many are already training in eastern Russia. Newsweek reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry and the North Korean embassy in Beijing via email for comment. Patrick Cronin, Asia-Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute, said that by committing troops to the conflict, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un hopes to ingratiate himself with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin further while projecting a stronger international image. Kim Jong-un seeks more advanced defense technology and wants to obligate Putin to come to his defense to be able to threaten others without much fear of attack, he told Newsweek. He is also eager, listen to this part because I find this interesting and I think it's part of what we're seeing right now. He is also eager to put some of his troops into combat. Even though many will come home in body bags if returned at all, Kim will be able to boast that he has the only battle-ready troops on the peninsula, Cronin added. Now, I think there's actually some legitimacy to that. Ukraine right now has been the most efficient training ground for troops that has existed in modern warfare. We're learning a lot from that conflict here as civilians. We're learning a lot from that conflict militarily. And our enemies are learning a lot from the conflict. And getting your troops into combat without much risk of actually entering your country into an all-out war is one way to actually gain that experience in order to harden your military for future engagements. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing right now. That's why these countries are all jumping in at every opportunity, but it's also why this is a global conflict, because these countries are inserting themselves in places where they don't necessarily belong. but this is where we are. This is what's happening right now, and I don't know if there's much we can do to stop it. So the best thing we can do as citizens or civilians is prepare, right? So guess who else is going to join now? South Korea. This is how it goes. It just doesn't stop. South Korea could follow north into Russia-Ukraine war. Okay? South Korean media claimed on Monday, that's today, that Seoul could send military and intelligence personnel to Ukraine after the North dispatched troops to support Russia in the war. A report said the government and military of South Korea are reviewing a plan to send an appropriate number of personnel, including intelligence officers specialized in North Korea and experts in enemy tactics to Ukraine, citing a South Korean intelligence official. South Korean personnel in Ukraine would interrogate or provide interpretation services if North Korean soldiers were captured by Ukrainian forces, the report said. They would also provide Kiev with information about the North's military tactics, doctrine, and operations. Proxy much? Are we seeing a lot of proxy war right now? Yes, we are. The Defense Ministry of the South said at a press briefing later on Monday that it will review measures with an open attitude regarding possible supply of lethal weapons to Ukraine. Seoul has provided humanitarian aid to Kiev during the Russia-Ukraine war. Okay? Listen, this is South Korea fighting North Korea in Ukraine. Just like it's the U.S. fighting Russia in Ukraine. Just like it's the U.S. fighting Iran in Israel, right? Well, or in Iran, I guess. But regardless, this is what this is. This is global conflict. Everybody's getting involved. Troops from one nation are going to be used to efficiently remove troops from another nation, and those nations don't even have to be from the nation that this is happening within. And that's exactly what we're witnessing, and now even South Korea is getting involved. So it just keeps growing, all right? The report and remarks from South Korea came after the country's intelligence agency on Friday claimed that North Korea, ruled by Kim Jong-un, had decided to dispatch 12,000 Special Forces troops to support Russia, with 1,500 of them already in the Russian Far East. Okay? On Thursday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky stated that North Korea has an intention to prepare 10,000 soldiers from different branches of armed forces to fight alongside Russia, warning the North's involvement could be the first step to a world war. We're already there. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but it's true. We are already there. We're just watching it from the perspective of people who aren't in history books yet, right? So here we are. Now, we also have some escalation between North Korea and South Korea, which is another indication of exactly where we're heading, at least in my opinion. So, let's discuss. Okay. Oh, I'm going to share my own screen actually of me talking to you. But to be a little bit more professional about it, let's get back to North Korea. North Korea blows up parts of inter-Korean road and rail links in a symbolic display of anger. Now, this was widely reported. I'm sure many of you are aware of this already, but I just wanted to bring it up to show where we stand. And this is, by the way, from October 15th. So just to give you some perspective, a lot of things are happening within a very short period of time here that show intent for escalation in that region. And this matters when we talk about China here in just a minute. So be aware, we're getting into that. I promise you, it's still coming. Seoul, South Korea, in a symbolic display of anger, North Korea on Tuesday blew up the northern sections of unused road and rail routes that once linked it with South Korea, with the rivals exchanging threats days after the North claimed that the South flew drones over its capital, Pyongyang. The choreographed demolition underlines North Korea's growing anger against South Korea's conservative government. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to sever relations with South Korea and abandon the goal of achieving peaceful Korean unification. Okay? They don't care anymore. They're done. They're over it. They've been over it. But that was just another example of those things occurring. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or what some might refer to as the dragon in the room, but China. Now, the reason I brought up North Korea and South Korea in relation to China is important because we're about to see that there was a recent military drill that actually had more to do with that than it did with Taiwan. But first we're going to talk about the fact that Xi Jinping wants his military to be ready for an all-out war. And this was just recent here on October 19th, but it's still important for you to be aware of in case you weren't I don't know, on the internet that day because it seemed to circulate everywhere, but I still find this fascinating and also concerning based on the fact that we all know that China is the last straw when it comes to this worldwide conflict. They're not directly involved in the Middle East, although they are adjacent. They're not directly involved in Eastern Europe, but they are adjacent. When they become directly involved, what type of war will that be other than a world war, right? Xi Jinping asked troops to prepare for war as battle drills intensify around Taiwan. Chinese President Xi Jinping called this week for troops to strengthen their preparedness for war. State media reported today, just days after Beijing staged large-scale military drills around Taiwan, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Xi made his comments while visiting a brigade of the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force on Thursday, according to state-run broadcaster CCTV. Xi said the military should comprehensively strengthen training and preparation for war and ensure troops have solid combat capabilities, state media CCTV reported. Soldiers must enhance their strategic deterrent and combat capability, Xi said. And China, which claims Taiwan as part of its territory, has stepped up its shows of force around the self-ruled island in recent years. On Monday, Beijing had deployed fighter jets, drones, warships, and Coast Guard vessels to encircle Taiwan, its fourth round of large-scale war games around the democratic island in just over 2 years. China's communist leaders have insisted they will not rule out using force to bring Taiwan under Beijing's control. Now, here's where it gets even dicier, okay? We had this major military drill encircling the island of Taiwan. And what a lot of people expected was the fact that this was showing Taiwan that they could invade at any moment, right? And it was trying to use attrition against Taiwan and their ability to respond. But it sounds like there might be more to it. And I find this to be very fascinating as well, because they are clearly preparing for our response to an invasion of Taiwan, not just invading it. And that is where things are going to get very interesting and obviously problematic, okay? Now, let's talk about the smokescreen, apparently. Encircling Taiwan was a smokescreen for China's real goal of convincing U.S. not to intervene, expert says. Okay? What do you mean? Okay. China planned the exercises in advance and would have carried them out regardless of what Lai said, them trying to say that they were mad about Taiwan's president making statements. Okay? And this was said by the non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global China Hub, Elizabeth Freund-Loris. The military exercises are intended to wear down Taiwan's military hardware and personnel. The purposes of the exercises are to threaten Taiwan's security to the point that the Taiwan people lose confidence in their government and to change the status quo of a Taiwan separate from China. But people are saying that that's not quite exactly what happened. All those reasons would be enough to justify the military maneuvers if one views them from Beijing's tactical standpoint. But senior research fellow with the ROC Society for Strategic Studies, Dr. Chang Qing, who also served in the Navy for several decades, told Fox News Digital that people are missing the big picture. Chang pointed to publicly available military logs from Japan that tracked both Russian and Chinese ships over several days before the 13-hour exercise. Russian and Chinese ships. A joint staff press release from Japan's Ministry of Defense on Monday, October 14th stated, on October 11th, 2024, Friday, around 5 p.m., the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force confirmed the presence of 6 vessels, 4 Chinese and 2 Russian, in the waters approximately 400 kilometers northeast of Okinotorishima Island, Tokyo. These were just some of the ships identified, and Japanese press releases noted that they had been tracking both Chinese and Russian naval actions since late September. The location of these ships at those times, Chang asserted, means they cannot have been plausibly connected to the short Taiwan blockade. The real target is the United States, he said. They were using a very old Chinese strategy called encircling the point, striking the reinforcement. In other words, practicing ways to ambush the U.S. Navy if it heads towards an already held hostage Taiwan. If China can convince the U.S. that intervening in any actions it chooses to take in the Taiwan Strait is not worth the risk, then Beijing wins. Other local experts had similar takes on the situation.
Taiwan Central News Agency quoted assistant professor at Tam Kang University Graduate Institute of International Affairs and Strategic Studies, Lin Ying Yu, who argued that the timing of the military drills was an attempt by China to probe the United States' ability to respond to simultaneous crises. I like to say it weird sometimes, I guess, on the Korean Peninsula and in the Taiwan Strait. Interesting that they're concerned with the idea of having to respond to a South Korea situation involving North Korea and China suddenly striking Taiwan all at the same time. The Chinese Navy, depending on what matrix is used to be measured, is either in second place after the US, has overtaken the US, or is basically even. Regardless of rankings, the Chinese have a formidable navy that is often dismissed as inexperienced. Analysts such as Chang, however, who spent his adult life studying military strategy and threats, say those who underestimate China's navy do so at their own peril. Here's what really interested me about this story. First off, it's Russia and China working on drills together that are specifically created to practice intercepting a U.S. response to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And that is Russia and China, not just China. Then we also have the idea that it is part of a strategy towards, where are we at again? Towards disrupting a response to the Korean Peninsula. Sorry, like I said, I'm still recovering from this sickness, so I have a little bit of brain fog. But interestingly enough, this is not getting as much attention as just the fact that Taiwan was blockaded. Taiwan has been blockaded before. Not by as many vessels, not by as many ships as before. This was one of the largest blockades that's ever happened there, right? But this part of the exercise that happened previous to it was what was actually being telegraphed. And it's not just China, it is Russia. And it's not just about Taiwan, it's about Korea. And we have instances right now of Russia, China, Taiwan, North Korea, South Korea, all being directly involved in this. And China is the last straw to break the camel's back. If they get involved in a direct conflict with any other nation at this point in time, yes, they have skirmishes with India on their border. Yes, we know that China has military involvement in other places, creating problems in the Philippines and things of that nature. But if China is in a war, the same way that Russia's in a war with Ukraine, the same way that Iran is in a war with Israel, if China enters a war in a hot sense with a country right now, aka Taiwan, when other time are you going to admit that this is World War III, right? And they're literally practicing with Russia because they know who's going to be on what team when this turns into that exact conflict. They're practicing with them to intercept our Navy to stop us from actually responding properly. So, this is where we're at. And thanks to the people who are in our own government here in the United States, we're really short on time because they had a deadline. I honestly believe they had a deadline to go to war before the election. And these leaks that happened in order to prevent an immediate Israeli retaliation against Iran may have been done on purpose by somebody from inside who does not want to see that occur. First off, we know that an administration that is in a wartime environment has a better chance of getting reelected. Second off, we also know that there are war hawks in both parties in all of our systems, part of the military-industrial complex, that want to see us in another war in the Middle East. And they also are aware that with the possible change of a presidency here in the near future, they may not have the ability to convince a different White House of actually moving forward with some of those wars. Now, is that what's actually the case? I don't know. There's been a lot of strong rhetoric coming from Donald Trump recently about Israel and Iran. We could see that regardless of who is in the White House. I'm not sure. But what I will say is that we are on a precipice. And at this point in time, we have 15 days until the election day here in the United States. And at least in my opinion, it has been the plan for quite some time to drag us into another war before that date. So these next 15 days are going to be pivotal. And you have to be very aware of what's happening. Even if it doesn't directly affect us here in the U.S., it will affect something. It will affect how things are handled moving forward. And don't forget how much power can be leveraged during a national emergency based on being in a wartime environment. Things happen, and things happen very quickly. And all you have to do is reference certain things like the Patriot Act to remember how quickly things can be taken from you in a time of need that never get taken back, right? Osmond Holistic says, everything is moving quickly now. It sure seems to be that way. And I don't necessarily like the trajectory, but we aren't necessarily in a position to make any changes, are we? Hopefully we can make some level of change. I agree that that is something we may have the capacity to do, but I am not a decision maker, and that's a big part of the problem. There are no regular people at the top making decisions with our best interests in mind. It's just not the way it works at this point in time. So we have to have our own best interests in mind. And the only way to do that is to have a proper amount of preparedness. Make sure you have food. You know what? It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. Go to the store, buy groceries, put them away, fill up your cupboards, fill up your fridge, and feel good about it, right? That'll get you through quite a bit, right? In the immediacy of an emergency, that helps a lot, okay? Have some extra gas on hand. Have some additional resources. If you don't have cash or any additional money in the bank or whatever it may be, things are going to get really tight for you if things get dicey here soon. And if any level of war breaks out in the Middle East, oil most likely should skyrocket. Most would have assumed it would have already, but it hasn't. So be prepared for that, because gas, although it's expensive right now, could go through the roof, right? And that'll affect all of your cost of living moving forward. So I know it's very hard right now, and I know a lot of us are struggling. If you have financial breathing room, you're in a good spot. If you don't, try to figure out if there's any way to create it. But either way, also remember this, and I want you guys to remember this. I'm going to be talking to Bear Independent tomorrow. I don't care if you like him or not. He's on the ground. He's moving mountains when it comes to trying to get people help over in those disaster-torn regions. And I need information from somebody who's actually there that can actually give me real information about what's needed and what we as preppers need to do for ourselves to become assets in those scenarios, right? And so that's why he's going to be on here. And we have to remember that when everything went to hell in those areas, Americans, regular people, got together and made it happen and helped people literally dig themselves out of the worst hole they've ever been in. So it's us. And it always has been, but even now more so than ever, it's us. And you don't have to be alone. Your community is part of who you are. So please be prepared. Have yourself taken care of. But remember that there are other good Americans and other good people out there that will be willing to help others if things get bad. And we have to keep encouraging that level of involvement, because it's very hope inspiring that so many people are willing to help when someone lost everything, right? So 100%, I appreciate every single one of you. I will be hosting the private live stream at 9:15 tonight. If you want to be part of that, you can join Subscribestar, or you can join the YouTube channel membership by hitting the join button down below. Subscribestar is $5 a month. There are some additional perks there. I haven't been as active on it over the last couple of weeks as I would like to be, because I've been pretty sick, I'll be honest with you all, and I'm trying my best to get through this, but if you can't tell, my voice has increasingly become more hoarse throughout the night. Regardless, I'm making it happen. I just put the Subscribestar link in the live chat. It's also in the description if you'd like to join. It also supports the channel directly. And I will tell you one thing. I personally have recognized a lot of faults and failures in my own ability to plan after witnessing what others were capable of doing in some of their responses to these disasters. And I am now motivated to become even more capable in that regard. So hopefully all of you are in the same boat. And without your support, I wouldn't even have the capacity or the capability that I even have right now. So I 100% want you to understand that I appreciate you more than you'll know, and that I will continue to do this to try to hopefully help others prepare and motivate others to be ready for whatever may come. And this is what I do. So thank you so much for being here. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification if you would like to do this again in a week. We're going to do another live stream. I generally do these weekly, and honestly, it's a great way to get caught up on information from the previous week, as well as have discourse with others in the chat and network with other like-minded people. Anything else you need from me? MagicPrepper.com is a great resource, and besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.